I'm Marcy Dalton, 36 years old, and if you asked me last year what the biggest turning point of my adult life would be, I'd probably have said selling part of my company or restoring my dream Mustang. But nothing could have prepared me for the night my parents told me to sell every last one of my cars to buy my sister a house. It wasn't a suggestion or a plea. It was an expectation, and when I pushed back, they acted like I'd betrayed the family. What came next would lead to police warnings, legal threats, and the longest midnight drive of my life. Before I go any further, let me know where you're listening from in the comments and hit that like and subscribe button. If you've ever had to draw the line between love and obligation. My love for cars started early. Back when I was a little girl growing up in a small town in western Michigan, while other kids were glued to cartoons, I'd spend Saturday mornings at my grandfather's auto shop breathing in the scent of motor oil and rusted bolts. He'd hand me tools and let me watch as he brought broken engines back to life. I wasn't just watching either. He taught me how to use a socket wrench before I turned 9. I remember him saying, "There's no shame and dirt under your nails if it means you built something with your own hands." Those afternoons with him weren't just about learning engines. They were about learning integrity and focus and how to find peace in something as simple as turning a bolt until it holds. When I turned 16, Grandpa helped me buy a busted-up '91 Ford Tempo. We spent the better part of a year fixing it together. Every dent, every screech in the brakes, every stalled start became a lesson. We laughed a lot, but he never let me skip the hard parts. If a gasket needed replacing, he showed me how to unseal it properly, not because I was a girl or not a girl, but because that's how you treat something you care about. From then on, I made a quiet promise to myself. Someday when I'd earned it, I'd have a collection of cars that told my story, not just the glossy kind, but the ones that took grit to restore my parents. Carl and Denise were never unkind exactly, but they never understood why I'd rather fix things than plan bridal showers. They hoped I'd go into teaching or nursing, something stable and ladylike when I said I wanted to major in computer science. My father rolled his eyes and muttered something about trends passing. My mother was more concerned about whether I'd be able to find a husband with a career like that. I still remember her saying, "Men like women who don't outshine them." I didn't argue. I just took out loans, packed my bags, and went to college 3 hours away. College was a marathon. I juggled night shifts and full course loads coding until dawn, fueled by vending machine coffee and whatever determination lived in my bones. After graduation, I joined a tech startup in Detroit. Long hours, low pay. But I soaked up every ounce of experience I could when the timing felt right. I branched off and launched my own software company, something small focused on workflow tools for local mechanics, the kind of place my grandfather used to run. We started in a cramped apartment with a folding table and 3 laptops. By the time I was 34, we had a real office. 30 employees and investors at the door asking about long-term shares for every milestone my company hit. I marked it with a car not to show off, but because that's how I understood my journey. The Jaguar came after our first national client, the Porsche, after our biggest contract to date. And the Lamborghini I found at an estate sale the year I paid off my student loans. Each car had a name, a memory, a lesson. They weren't trophies, they were mile markers, and I kept them in a custom-built garage on my property where I still spent Sunday mornings polishing chrome and listening to oldies with a shop rag in my back pocket. I also joined a local classic car club where I met Wes, a restoration genius, and Lena, a photographer who turned every fender curve into art together. We hosted annual charity shows to fund scholarships for girls in STEM. Those weekends were my retreat from the chaos of business, the one place where no one questioned why I cared about engine specs or the year a Corvette bodyline changed shape. But while I was building something brick by brick, my younger sister Jenna was drifting job to job, hobby to hobby. She was the golden child in my parents' eyes, their free spirit, their late bloomer. Even when she dropped out of college and maxed out her credit cards, they insisted she was just figuring things out. And every time I tried to help her get on her feet, whether it was rent or job referrals or even paying off her debt, it was never enough. The older we got, the more it felt like I was the backup plan for every bad decision she made. I told myself it was temporary, that someday Jenna would find her way and stop leaning so hard on everyone else. But then came the night they called me to dinner saying there was something important to discuss, and for the first time in years, my mother's voice didn't sound hopeful or warm. It sounded prepared, rehearsed like a plan was already in motion. The next evening, I pulled into my parents' driveway right at 6. My sister Jenna's Civic was already there, along with a black Lexus I didn't recognize. As I stepped inside, the living room was unusually formal. Dad in his recliner hands, folded face unreadable. Mom sat on the couch, spine straight next to Jenna, who was practically bouncing in place, and next to her, wearing a navy blue pantsuit and holding a leather portfolio, was a woman I'd never seen before. Marcy. "This is Shelley Parker," Mom said with a quick smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "She's a real estate agent." I shook her hand out of reflex, trying to hide the confusion on my face. The coffee table was covered in glossy brochures and property listings. Something about the setup made me hesitate to sit. "If this is about you guys downsizing," I said slowly, "you could have just told me over the phone." Dad cleared his throat. "This isn't about us. It's about Jenna." Jenna grinned. "We found the perfect house," she said. "It's 4 bedrooms. Great neighborhood, has a huge backyard. You should see the kitchen." Shelley opened her portfolio and slid a brochure toward me. "It's just under $900,000, she said, tapping a corner of the page. "Colonial style, 3 full baths, recently updated." Still standing, I looked down at the listing, the numbers printed in bold font, just under the picture of a wraparound porch. "I don't understand what this has to do with me," I said quietly. My father shifted forward. "We think it's time Jenna had some stability, a fresh start, a place to call her own." "She's been through a lot," Mom added. "It's time she had a foundation." Then Dad said it like it was the most reasonable thing in the world. "We think you should sell your car collection to buy it for her." I blinked, unsure I'd heard him correctly. "You want me to sell all of them? They're just sitting in the garage most of the time," Mom said gently, like she was trying to console me. "You don't need 10 cars. Jenna leaned forward. "It's not like they'd be gone forever. Once I'm settled and working, you could start collecting again. And you can visit any time. There's a guest room." I sat down slowly, trying to collect my thoughts. Those cars aren't just toys. Every one of them marks something I worked for. Dad waved a hand like he was brushing dust off a shelf. "We're not saying you didn't earn them, but it's time to think bigger. Investing in your sister's future, that matters more. Who's going to pay the mortgage, the property taxes, the upkeep?" I asked. "She's interviewing Mom," replied quickly. "And we'll help at the start." Shelley chimed in again, pointing to school district ratings. "This is an excellent opportunity. Property values in that area are very stable." Jenna pulled out her phone. "I've already started a Pinterest board for decorating. I'm thinking mid-century modern in the living room, maybe some brushed gold finishes in the bathroom." I tried offering other ideas. I could co-sign for an apartment, help her find a more manageable place, or even help her with job placement again. Jenna's face fell. "But I've already told Shelley we're interested. The sellers are motivated." The room went quiet except for the ticking of the clock above the mantel. Then Dad spoke again, more firmly. "This is about family, and family supports each other." I sat back, the brochure still in my lap. I felt like I'd been handed a script I didn't agree to read from. When I didn't respond right away, Mom's voice cracked. "I thought we raised you to be generous. You have a successful company," Dad added. You live in a nice place. You can afford this." Jenna didn't speak, but she looked at me like I'd already disappointed her. Shelley adjusted her blazer, probably sensing the tension but pushing ahead. "There's still time to move on this," she said. "I know a few collectors who'd be interested in your cars as a lot." I stood up. "I need some air." The rest of the evening blurred together. I left quietly, drove around for a while before heading home. As soon as I walked in, my phone lit up with messages. Aunt Judy said she'd heard I'd refused to help my sister. My cousin Ryan texted about not forgetting where you came from. Apparently, they'd already spread their version of the story, one where I was the selfish sister sitting on millions refusing to help. No mention of the years I covered rent or helped with jobs or paid off Jenna's debt. Just that I said no. That night I couldn't sleep. Every time I tried to rest, I'd picture my garage empty. Picture the Mustang gone or the Porsche loaded onto a trailer headed for someone else's lot. I thought about how long it had taken me to earn enough for each one, about the hours spent under the hood tuning, cleaning, restoring. The next few days the pressure didn't ease. Mom texted photos of throw pillows Jenna wanted for the living room. Dad left voicemails about sacrifice. Jenna sent me screenshots of mortgage options and furniture links tagging them with phrases like, "just ideas for later." Then Shelley called me directly. "I know this is emotional," she said, "but it's also a smart investment. If we act quickly, we can lock in a great rate." I told her I wasn't selling anything, at least not now, but the assumption that I eventually would seem to linger in every interaction. Then, on Saturday, Jenna showed up at my place. She didn't come alone. Two people trailed behind her, a man and a woman dressed in designer jeans and sunglasses. "Marcy," she said, "this is Clay and Melissa. They wanted to see the cars." I stepped back. "What, Clay collects vintage Porsches," she said, leading them toward the garage. Do not touch anything I said, stepping in front of the Porsche. No one was invited here. Clay pulled his hand back. "Sorry, she said it was fine." "It's not." Melissa laughed lightly. "Wow. Protective, huh?" Jenna rolled her eyes. "Don't be so uptight. You let me drive the Aston once, remember, no?" "I didn't. Well, maybe it was a different one. They all kind of blur together. That was it. I asked them all to leave." Clay and Melissa walked out without argument. Jenna hesitated. "You'll come around," she said. "Dad says you just need time to remember what matters." 2 days later, Shelley showed up again. This time, she brought documents. "I just need a few signatures," she said. "It's a great offer." Jenna hovered behind her, clearly thrilled. I didn't even look at the papers. "No one has the right to make decisions about my property but me." Shelley looked uncomfortable. "Your father said this was a family decision. It's not." That night, I checked the hook by my kitchen door, where I usually kept the garage spare key. It was gone. I called Wes. He hesitated before telling me someone had called him last week asking about the collection price's model's condition. They hung up when he asked who was calling. The next morning, I checked my security camera footage. A few days earlier, while I was at the office, Jenna and Dad had been in my garage. They walked from car to car taking photos, opening doors. In one clip, I heard Dad say, "Once Marcy comes around, we'll need to be ready." That's when I realized this wasn't just about pressure anymore. It was something else, something I'd have to stop before it got worse. That night, I barely slept. I kept thinking about the footage, my dad walking between the cars, pointing out details, Jenna trailing behind him, snapping pictures like she was cataloging inventory. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the empty hook by my kitchen door where the garage key used to hang. By morning, I decided to call Marcus, a friend from college who'd gone into family law. He answered on the second ring. I kept my voice steady as I explained the situation, how they'd entered my property without permission, how they were treating my collection like it was already theirs, how the pressure wasn't letting up. He didn't hesitate. "You need to protect your assets," he said. They have no legal right to sell or access anything, but that doesn't mean they won't try. Lock everything down and start documenting everything, text calls, even casual conversations. After we hung up, I walked through the house, noting every place where a spare key used to be. I made a list: garage side gate, office drawer, and by lunchtime, I'd already called a locksmith. I also started pulling together my car titles, insurance documents, and maintenance records into one large binder. The next day, Jenna sent me a message with links to luxury furniture. Thought this would look amazing in the living room, she wrote, followed by a winking emoji. I didn't reply. An hour later, another message came through. This time an email forwarded from Shelley outlining closing costs and financing options. The subject line simply read, "Just FYI, when you're ready." I didn't respond to that either. That Saturday, I was in the garage replacing a fuel line in the Ferrari when I heard a car in the driveway. I wiped my hands and stepped out just in time to see Jenna getting out of the driver's side. Behind her were two men I didn't recognize. "Hey," she said cheerfully, "these are some friends of mine. Brent's into vintage cars. I told him you had an incredible collection." Before I could answer, one of the men, Brent, I assumed, started walking toward the garage, eyeing the vehicles. I stepped between him and the Porsche before he could get close. "No one's viewing anything today," I said. Jenna waved me off. "Relax, he's just looking. Might even be interested in buying one if you decide to sell. Wouldn't that make this easier?" I turned to Brent. "Please wait outside." He paused, looked at Jenna, then nodded and stepped back. The second man followed. Jenna didn't move. "You're being dramatic," she said. "They're just cars." I kept my voice even. "You brought people onto my property without asking. You let them into my garage. That's not okay." She gave a short laugh like she couldn't believe I was serious. "You used to let me drive the Aston." "You don't remember I never let you drive the Aston," I said. "You asked." I said no. She blinked. "Well, maybe it was something else. They all look the same to me." That was when I asked her to leave. Her face dropped, but I didn't waver. Brent and the other guy were already back in the car by the time she stormed off. As she reached the end of the driveway, she turned around. "You'll come around," she said. "Dad says you just need a little more time." 2 days later, Shelley showed up again. This time she had a folder tucked under her arm and Jenna trailing close behind. "I just need a few signatures," Shelley said from my doorstep. "There's a buyer interested in the full collection. We can close quickly." I didn't let them in. I haven't agreed to anything I said. Shelley looked surprised. "Your father said this was already decided, that it was a family resolution." "Well, it wasn't." Jenna crossed her arms. "Why are you being so difficult? It's not like you can't replace them later." I didn't answer. I shut the door. After they left, I called Wes. I told him everything about the missing key, the unannounced visit, and the growing pressure to give in. His voice stayed calm, but I could hear concern under the surface. "You think they might try something?" he asked. "I don't know what they're capable of anymore." That night, I sat on the floor of my garage with the binder in my lap. I flipped through the documents, titles, insurance papers, service logs, and tried to think clearly. The cars were mine. Every cent, spent every hour under the hood, every deal that made it possible, had been mine alone. But my family didn't see it that way. The next morning, I rewatched the security footage from earlier that week. At one point, my dad stood next to the Corvette, resting his hand on the roof. "We'll need to act fast once Marcy signs," he said. That same day, I noticed something else, an email in my spam folder from a local appraisal firm. The message had no greeting, just a request for details about my vehicles, claiming they'd been contacted about a potential estate sale. I forwarded the email to Marcus. He replied within the hour, "Get everything secured now. This is going beyond casual pressure. I already had a basic security system, but I called a specialist to upgrade the cameras, change the garage code, and install motion sensors. Then I called Wes again. I think it's time to move the cars. He didn't ask questions. You want to use the warehouse? Just for a while, I said. Until I figure out what they're planning. He paused. We'll need to be discreet. We'll make a plan. That night I slept better than I had in weeks, but I knew the hardest part hadn't even started yet. Wes and I met at a quiet diner just off the interstate the next morning. We sat in a booth near the back where no one knew us and kept our voices low. I told him everything about the missing key, the photos, the real estate pressure, and the way my father had spoken in the video footage. Wes listened without interrupting his coffee going cold in front of him. If they think you'll cave, they'll keep pushing, he said finally. But if they realize the cars are out of reach, it might change the conversation. He offered the warehouse space he used for long-term restorations. Climate-controlled, gated secure. No signage, no windows. Just a steel building in a quiet industrial zone with more space than he needed at the moment. We put together a plan over the next hour. 10 cars would have to be moved discreetly without attracting attention. We'd do it at night in staggered intervals, each car taking a different route. Wes would handle the logistics, route planning, driver assignments, prepping the warehouse. I'd handle the paperwork and legal cover. That afternoon, I pulled the titles and registrations for all 10 vehicles sorted by year and model, then drafted a formal letter revoking any prior garage access for family members. Marcus reviewed it that evening and suggested I also update the locks immediately, just in case. By noon the next day, my locksmith had changed every entry point. A new keypad controlled the garage. Cameras were repositioned and a security technician installed sensors on the garage doors that would alert me directly if tampered with. That night, Wes and I met again, this time in my garage. One by one, our volunteer drivers arrived, all trusted members from the car club. Some had worked restoration jobs with Wes, others had shown at charity events I'd helped organize. They parked blocks away and walked up in pairs carrying gloves and earpieces, avoiding light where they could. By 11:45, all 10 of us stood in the garage. I gave a quick rundown route schedules, emergency backups. Each driver had been assigned a specific vehicle. I'd drive the Countach, Wes would take the Viper. Sophia, the photographer from our club, squeezed my arm. "They'll be safe," she said. "We'll make sure of it." At midnight sharp, the first engine turned over. The Mustang, the one that started it all, eased down the driveway and vanished into the dark. Every 5 minutes after, another vehicle followed. The Jaguar, the Corvette, the Porsche, the Aston. By the time the 7th car had left the garage was more echo than engine. I stood near the wall watching the spaces empty. I hadn't realized how quiet it would feel without them. When it was time for me to take the Lamborghini, I paused. Wes was waiting in the Viper with the lights off, ready to follow. I climbed in, turned the key, and let the engine settle into its familiar growl. We took different roads. Wes headed west through the warehouse district. I looped north along the parkway before cutting back through a service lane near the rail yard. It wasn't a long drive, but every minute felt like a stretch of thread about to snap. When I pulled into the bay door behind the warehouse, the other 8 cars were already lined up in neat rows under soft, overhead lights. Sophia stood by the entrance clipboard in hand, checking off names. Wes rolled in last. The Viper's engine cut, and silence took over. Everyone looked around as if trying to take in the oddness of it all, 10 beautiful machines tucked away like secrets. Wes handed me a key fob. "Only you and I have access now," he said. "Security system went in yesterday. I trust the installer. Retired Navy, keeps his mouth shut." I nodded. I didn't have the words to thank him or the others. They didn't ask for any. They stayed for a few more minutes, chatting quietly, then left in groups catching rides arranged in advance. Sophia offered to let me stay with her for a few nights, just until you feel things settle, she said, in case anyone starts showing up at your house. I accepted. I wasn't sure what might happen next, but I didn't want to find out alone. We double-checked the locks, armed the alarms, and shut the main bay door. When it closed with a final metallic thud, I felt something shift. The cars were out of reach now. Whatever my family planned, they couldn't touch them. I didn't know if this move would solve anything, but it was the first decision I'd made in weeks that felt like mine alone. The next morning, my phone rang at 7:30. My dad's number. I let it go to voicemail. When I played it back, his voice was tight. "What have you done with the cars, Marcy?" he asked. "I stopped by this morning. The garage is empty." "Where are they?" He didn't say hello. Didn't ask if I was all right, just launched into questions. I sat at Sophia's kitchen table sipping coffee as the message played again. My dad wasn't confused. He was angry. And if he'd come by that early, it meant he'd expected to confront me in person. I stared out her window, watching a sparrow hop along the edge of the porch railing. I didn't know what he'd try next. But I knew this wasn't over. The voicemail from my father had barely finished playing before my mother's name lit up on the screen. I didn't answer. Her call went to voicemail too. A few minutes later, another message arrived, this time from Jenna. It was a long paragraph filled with capital letters and accusations. She said I was ruining her life, that I'd embarrassed the family, and that all she'd ever wanted was to feel supported. I skimmed it once and put my phone face down on the table. Sophia poured me another cup of coffee and slid it across the counter. "You sure you don't want to block their numbers for now?" she asked. I wasn't sure. Part of me wanted to know what they were saying. The other part already knew. Later that morning, I got a call from Marcus. He'd received a letter from a law firm neither of us recognized. It claimed I had improperly removed shared family assets and requested their immediate return. The letter was worded to sound legal, but there was no actual claim behind it, just vague language about family welfare and obligation. Marcus called it nonsense, dressed in a suit. Still, he advised me to take it seriously. "We're past subtle pressure," he said. "This is intimidation. I'll draft a formal response." That night, I sat at Sophia's kitchen table while Marcus walked me through the reply over speakerphone. The letter was brief, professional, and direct. It stated that all 10 vehicles were legally owned by me alone. It included copies of the titles and a warning that any unauthorized attempt to access or sell them would be treated as theft. We also added a notice revoking any implied permission for family members to enter my home or garage and made it clear that any keys still in their possession must be returned immediately. Once the letter was sent, I thought things might settle, but the messages kept coming. Jenna left 3 voicemails in one afternoon, her voice swinging between angry and tearful. She accused me of choosing metal over blood, said I never cared about her, and finally claimed she'd report the cars as stolen if I didn't return them. That last line made my chest tighten. I forwarded the audio to Marcus. He didn't laugh this time. "She files a false report that's a crime," he said. "We'll need to send a warning before it escalates." I drafted one final message to my entire family, my parents, Jenna, and a few cousins who'd chimed in earlier. It was short, calm, and clear. The cars were mine. They were secured and documented. Any attempt to claim otherwise would be treated as a legal matter. I also stated for the record that false reports to law enforcement would carry consequences. Then I blocked Jenna's number. I set my parents' calls to voicemail and turned off message previews. That was the first night in weeks I slept through the night. In the days that followed, I poured myself into work. My company had been on autopilot during the crisis, and it felt good to get back into the rhythm, reviewing code releases, checking in with the team, planning updates. I also joined a local support group that met weekly at the library downtown. It was for adults dealing with family estrangement and boundary setting. The stories I heard there were quieter than mine, but the themes were the same. People who had given too much stayed too long or learned too late how to say no. Over the next 3 months, contact from my parents slowed to a trickle. I'd get the occasional email from Mom asking if we could talk, always ending with a request to reconsider. I replied politely, but only to acknowledge receipt. I didn't reopen the conversation. Then something happened that I hadn't expected. My mother in one of her updates mentioned that Jenna had taken a job. She was working mornings at a coffee shop called Riverbend Roast, making lattes and cleaning tables. The hours started before sunrise. She was living in a smaller place now, not the apartment she'd decorated for the house that never came. The update was worded like an apology. I read it twice before putting the phone down. 2 weeks later, I got a message from an unknown number. The text was short. "Hey, it's Jenna. I got a new phone. I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I'm sorry for everything. I'm working now. If you ever want to talk coffees on me, no pressure. Just thanks for reading this." I stared at the screen for a long time. The message was quiet. There was no blame, no request, no mention of houses or cars. Just coffee. Just space. I typed a reply, deleted it, then tried again. "I need time to think about this, but I appreciate the message." Her response came an hour later. "Take all the time you need. I'll be here. Working a lot." I didn't know what would come of it, but for the first time in months, I wasn't holding my breath. Something was shifting. 2 weeks after that message, I agreed to meet Jenna at Riverbend Roast. She suggested her afternoon break around 2 o'clock when the lunch crowd had cleared out, and she'd have a little breathing room. I arrived 15 minutes early and chose a seat near the back facing the counter. The shop was inside a renovated brick building with tall windows and mismatched chairs, the kind of place with chalkboard menus and soft indie music playing in the background. Jenna was working behind the register when I walked in. She didn't wave or rush over. She just finished taking a couple's order, handed off a pastry bag, then leaned over to speak to her manager before heading toward me. She still had her apron on and her hair was pulled back in a tight bun. "Thanks for coming," she said, sitting across from me. She set down a cup without asking what I wanted. "Oat milk vanilla latte. Extra shot." "Right." I nodded, surprised she remembered. "Right." She glanced around the cafe before looking back at me. "I get a 15 now, then another 30 after the rush later if you want to talk more then." I took a sip of the coffee. It was exactly how I liked it. We sat in silence for a moment, the quiet kind that feels like waiting. She looked tired. Her nails were shorter than I remembered, and there were faint lines under her eyes. "You look good," I said. "This suits you." She let out a breath and laughed, small but real. "I don't know about that. My feet are killing me, and I failed at latte art 6 times this week. But it's honest. I should have done this years ago." She paused, then looked down at her hands. "I should have done what you asked, gotten a job, paid my way, just stopped expecting everyone else to solve things for me." Her voice was lower than usual, the words coming slowly like she was choosing each one with care. "What changed?" I asked. She shrugged. "You did." Then she explained. After the cars were moved and the house deal fell through, things had shifted. Our parents had tried to smooth things over with Shelley, but the sellers had already moved on. Dad had promised too much too early. Mom stopped mentioning the house and started focusing on smaller things, how Jenna might furnish a studio apartment, what temp agencies were hiring nearby. "At first I was mad," she said. "Really mad. I thought you'd betrayed me. But once the noise died down, I had to ask myself why I was waiting for someone else to fix my life." Her break ran a little over 15 minutes, but no one called her back early. She offered to keep talking after her second break, and I agreed to stay. She went back behind the counter and disappeared into the rhythm of orders and coffee cups. I stayed at the table watching her work. She didn't complain. She didn't slack. She moved with focus, calling out drinks and wiping counters between customers. At 2:30, she returned with another drink in hand and sat down again. "This one's on the house," she said, "perks of barista life." We picked up where we left off. She told me how hard it had been applying for jobs with no work history, how most places didn't even call back. Riverbend was the only one that gave her a shot, and even then, it was on a trial basis. The first week was rough, she said. People can be rude, over a drink order, over a 5-minute wait. But when I got my first paycheck, that felt good. I'd never felt that before. She told me she was managing her own rent now in a modest 1-bedroom across town. Furnished with secondhand finds, she cleaned up herself. No more credit cards, she added. No more pretending I can afford things I can't. She talked about her manager, a woman named Tori, and how watching her run the shop made her think differently about business. I've been looking at community college classes. Business admin, maybe hospitality. Nothing huge, just something to build on. As we talked, I kept waiting for the ask for her to bring up the past, or the cars, or our parents' frustration. But she didn't. She asked about my work, about how I balance things. She even asked how to build a weekly budget. It didn't happen all at once, but we started meeting once a week, sometimes at the shop, sometimes after her shift. She never asked for money, never asked to see the cars. She showed up, she asked questions, and she talked about her own goals in a way that felt steady, not borrowed. 6 weeks later, during one of our walks through the park near my office, I asked her about Mom and Dad. She nodded slowly. "They're still trying," she said. "Mom keeps suggesting desk jobs or remote work. Dad offered to cover my rent again last month." And I asked. I said no. She stopped walking and looked at me. "I need to do this myself. I have to know I can stand on my own." We kept walking. After a long pause, she added, "I was so angry at you for saying no. But now I see if you'd said yes, none of this would have changed. I'd still be waiting for someone else to fix it." We didn't say anything else for a while, just walked quietly, the sound of wind in the trees and distant traffic filling the space between us. 6 months after our first coffee at Riverbend Roast, Jenna was promoted to shift supervisor. She texted me a photo of her new name badge, black plastic with white letters, and a tiny silver star in the corner. A few weeks later, she mentioned she'd registered for evening classes at the local community college. Business administration, 3 nights a week starting in the fall. We still met every Tuesday afternoon. Sometimes we just talked. Other times, she asked for help with class schedules or budgeting, or asked questions about how I'd launch my company. She never brought up the past unless I did. She never mentioned the house or the cars or the chaos that came before. It wasn't until early spring that she asked if I'd be attending the annual car show again. I'd been hosting it for years, raising scholarship funds for young women in technical trades. I was thinking, she said, stirring her coffee I could help this year. Maybe run the registration table or do something with ticket sales. "Sure," I said. "That would be great." She showed up on the morning of the event in jeans and a dark blue t-shirt with the scholarship logo printed across the chest. She stayed on her feet for 6 straight hours, checking names, answering questions, helping families find shaded seating. Lena took photos like always, capturing the usual lineup, Wes beside the Porsche, the Countach gleaming under the sun, kids leaning over velvet ropes to stare at the Aston Martin. Around noon, Jenna followed me back to the warehouse where the cars had been stored the year before. We were picking up a display board I'd forgotten to load the night before. I unlocked the side door, flicked on the overheads, and walked toward the corner shelving. She trailed behind me slower now. At some point, she stopped walking. I turned around to see her standing in front of the Porsche. She didn't touch it, just looked. "I get it now," she said quietly. I waited, not rushing her. "They're not just cars." She glanced toward the Mustang. "They're your story." We stood there for a long moment, the soft hum of the warehouse lights the only sound between us. When we walked back out, she didn't say anything else, and neither did I. But something had shifted. Over the following months, we had our share of hard conversations. I met with our parents again for the first time in almost a year. We met at a neutral restaurant halfway between our houses. Jenna came too. I laid out my terms ahead of time. No talk of finances. No talk of the collection. No questioning my decisions. My father struggled with the new boundaries. He still assumed certain things came with being the head of the family. My mother wavered between gratitude that we were all speaking again and discomfort that her old persuasion tactics didn't work anymore. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. We started rebuilding not back to what we were, but towards something new, something clearer. The cars stayed in storage a little longer. I wasn't quite ready to bring them home. But one evening that fall, after a long board meeting, I walked into the garage and realized I missed them. Not just the cars, but what they represented. I called Wes the next day. Over the next week, we arranged for them to come back one by one. The Mustang arrived first, then the Ferrari. The Porsche came last. By winter, they were all back in my garage under new lighting behind reinforced doors and a new security system. Marcus had helped me write a legal protection agreement for the entire collection, clear terms about ownership, usage, and access. When Jenna came by the house that following spring to help plan the next year's scholarship event, she paused in the garage doorway before stepping in. She walked the row, slowly stopping again at the Porsche. This time she reached out and rested her hand on the side mirror. "I still remember thinking it was ridiculous," she said, "all of this. But now, I can't believe I didn't see it before." I didn't need her to say anything more. The hardest part wasn't losing trust. It was rebuilding it with no shortcuts, and she had done the work. By the time summer settled in, the house felt different. The garage lights came on with a soft hum, catching the curve of the Mustang's fender and the pale gloss of the Porsche. I stood in the doorway and listened to the quiet. Nothing felt fragile anymore. The cars were home, and so were the boundaries that brought them back. Jenna stopped by one Saturday with a stack of flyers for the next scholarship show. We spread them across my kitchen table, penciling notes about vendors and volunteers. When we finished, she asked if we could walk through the garage. She moved slowly past each car, pausing at the Viper, like she was reading a chapter she'd skipped. "I was wrong," she said, not looking at me. "Thank you for not letting me stay that way." The words were simple, but they landed like a door closing softly behind us. We invited our parents to dinner a week later at the same quiet restaurant we'd chosen before. I set the rules ahead of time: no talk of money, no tests, no sideways comments. Dad ordered trout and kept his eyes on the menu longer than he needed to. When the plates arrived, he asked Jenna about her classes. He asked me about the charity fund. He didn't mention the house. He didn't mention the cars. On the way out, he squeezed my shoulder and said, "I'm glad you brought them home." It was not an apology, but it was a step. The car show that fall was our biggest yet. Wes handled the lineup, and friends from the club worked the ropes with calm efficiency. Jenna ran the registration desk like she'd been doing it for years, greeting people by name and keeping the line moving. I stood near the scholarship board and listened to a mother explain that her daughter loved welding but didn't know how to start. We got her an application, then another for a friend she mentioned from school. By noon, the donation jar was heavy. By late afternoon, we had enough for 2 full awards. When the sun dipped low, I walked the row of cars and let the day slow to a stop. I remembered the angry calls, the missing key, the pressure that made my chest feel tight. I remembered the night we moved everything in the dark, and the morning after, when the phone rang before I had my first cup of coffee. None of that lived here anymore. What remained was steadier earned trust, clearer lines, and the understanding that love can't grow in the shadow of obligation. Jenna came to stand beside me. Tori wants me to learn ordering and scheduling, she said, smiling a little. It's part of a manager track. I'm not rushing it. I just wanted you to know. I told her I was proud of her. She didn't look away. Here's what I learned standing in that doorway with grease on my hands and a life I could recognize again. The things we build with work and care deserve protection. Saying no is not a wall. It is a gate you learn to close and open wisely. Boundaries don't push family out. They invite the right kind of love in, and sometimes they give someone you care about the room to stand up on their own. Thank you for staying with me through this. If any part of it echoes your life, I'd be honored to hear your story. Share a thought in the comments, or pass this along to someone who might need it today. And if you'd like to join me for more quiet, true stories like this, you're welcome to subscribe and keep me company next time.